Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Sunday, March the 9th. And as we like to do on Sundays, we'll be chatting with our good friend George Rodriguez from South Texas. And George, you got to give me a weather report because I've seen some pretty interesting weather reports from South Texas. Did I hear that there was snow in Brownsville?
I believe there was a few
A few.
flurries,
Oh, okay. All right.
but
That's still pretty wild, though, isn't
it
it?
is. It's pretty. But mostly, what has been, I mean, the temperature dropped. I mean, we've had a dramatic move of temperatures, changes of temperatures. A couple of days ago, it was like in the about 81, 82.
Mhm.
Last night, it got down to 41.
Mhm.
Tonight it's going to get to about 45. Today it's been very, very sunny, but only 59. To us, that's cold
Yeah.
or cool. But in 2 days, it's going to come back up to the 80s. So,
Yeah,
we've
it's
had some
been like that here. It's been like that here. I mean, like
very
in a
wild
two,
swings.
yeah, in a 2 week span, we've had days in single digits, days in the 60s and 70s, and today it was very chilly in the morning. Felt like they said felt like 36 or something like that.
We have had some very strong winds, which has caused
Yeah,
concerns for fires because we have no
right.
water. I mean, everything that comes through dry.
Yeah.
And so we've had some very, very dry winds. So that's there's been some concerns for fires.
Well, there was one day this week where we had some incredible winds. I mean, there were
Yeah.
tornadoes in the area. So anyway, you know what they say: if you don't like the weather about Texas, if you don't like the weather, wait
No,
20 minutes.
March comes in like a lion and leaves like a lamb.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm sure there's a couple more surprises that Mother Nature has for us. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about issues. And I want to begin. I have a post over at the American Thinker today recalling the Evil Empire speech. And it's actually a speech that came in two parts. The first one was when President Reagan was in London speaking at the House of Commons, and he talked about, the Soviet Union at that time and its ambitious, you know, it was a different Soviet Union, obviously, than what we have now. And then in 1983, when he spoke before the religious group in Washington, D.C., and that is when I think he actually used the word evil empire. Now, that speech sounds very dated right now. I mean, when you listen to that speech now, 42 years later, the players are different, as I write in my American Thinker post. For one thing, the Soviet Union doesn't exist. We call it Russia now. Even some of the parts of the old Soviet Union are now independent countries, including Ukraine and Latvia and a few others. Then just the whole relationship is different. I mean, we now have hockey players from Russia playing for the National Hockey League, whereas back then they were playing for the Soviet team. We have these beautiful young Russian girls, playing tennis in very fashionable style. Obviously, that didn't happen back then. So a lot of things have changed, but I still recall this speech and the impact that it had for those of us in the West who were yearning, who were supporting freedom. And it's so hard. I guess in some ways, it's kind of hard to believe how much things have changed, George.
Yeah, the speech, like I said, was written and delivered in 1983. That was in a period when the Soviet Union was very, very active in in pushing its weight militarily around. And they had, let's remember that in 1979, 1980, they had invaded Afghanistan, and they were still at war in Afghanistan, and they were carrying on some very, very strong, I mean, some very, very, uh, uh, very, very vicious tactics in Afghanistan. There was also the issue of how they were pushing their weight against the East as well, Eastern Europe. And they were looking very, very menacing.
Mm-hmm.
They were involved also in Central America,
Right. That's right.
in Nicaragua and in El Salvador. They had involved Cubans in Angola. So they were very, very much, very, very much, very aggressive. And so what happened in this case, now I personally had already left the White House, and I was over at the Department of Justice by then. However, there was, and it continued into 1987 when they wrote the Berlin speech as well. But there had been a lot of tension within the White House on how Reagan would deliver speeches and what he would say. Reagan wanted to be very, very dramatic because his background was acting, and he was not afraid to tell it like it is. And in this case, there was a lot of tension behind the scenes between the communications director, who was David Gergen, and Anthony Dolan, who was Reagan's chief speechwriter. You had the chief speechwriter for the president, but then you had the communications director for the entire White House and for the entire administration, who set the tone, so to speak, on what was needed to say and hopefully how you would say it. And he and Gergen and Dolan used to go, head to head constantly. And this was one of the one of those speeches. Gergen did not want the phrase "evil empire" to be used. He was, as far as he was concerned, all you did was aggravate the Soviet Union and create more problems by using harsh, hard language. On the other hand, Dolan knew Reagan, I think, a whole lot better than Gergen, and Dolan was able to. Of course, Dolan had been with Reagan for a long, long, long time, and he was able to get the phrase in there because Reagan liked it. Reagan wanted to be straightforward with the Soviet Union and use this term.
Yeah. No, I think that's what I recall reading about too in the Reagan diaries and in his biography. By the way, David Bergen or Gergen. I had not heard that name in a while. He was, after he left President Reagan, he went to work with PBS, didn't he?
Yes, he
and
did.
He had,
and it raised a lot of eyebrows when he did.
Yeah, and he had that, back and forth with that other fellow, Mark. They were, they had that weekly debate, I guess.
Right.
I think it was on Fridays. And I remember him from that. And I don't know what he's doing now. Have you heard anything about David Gergen?
No. I had
last. Sure, he's retired.
Yeah. Okay. He's definitely retired. Last that I had heard, he was teaching. He was playing the role of a professor someplace.
Okay. All right. Well, that's probably what you do when you work when you work in the White House. You have a lot of stories to tell and a good book to write.
Right.
But I liked him. He was really good on TV, and I didn't know his exact role in the White House, but he was on TV. He was a good, conservative counterweight to Mark Shields, I think was his name, who was, the liberal side. But again, what's interesting to me about that, back and forth between Gergen and Shields on PBS is how different they were. At least Shields was not a crazy liberal. He was liberal, but he was not a crazy liberal. Today,
I don't know if you can debate with people today.
Well, that's it, and that's one of the things I want to talk to you about tonight as well. But I think what always pleased me about Reagan, and you mentioned it a bit, is that Reagan understood communications. And he understood that, you had to sometimes go out there and say what a lot of people didn't want to say. And when he called it, when he said, Gorbachev, tear down this wall, you're right that there was a lot of dissent within the White House. Don't say that because the Soviets are going to get angry.
Hurt their feelings.
Yeah. And Reagan said, well, that's the point. Let's hurt their feelings.
And that is exactly, I think that's exactly the style of communication that Trump has.
Exactly.
A lot of people dislike him and get upset with him, But the fact of the matter is that he tells it like it is.
Yeah.
You know,
Now, I would argue, not to cut you off, but just to make a quick point, getting back to Reagan, I would argue that Reagan's personality allowed him to get away with a few things that Trump is a little bit more direct, I guess, and yeah, I don't know, more in in your face kind of thing. Reagan had a way of saying all of that with a smile, but I understand the point you're making. But if the one last thing about the evil empire speech, George, and then we'll get to President Trump's not State of the Union, but speech before Congress. One thing about that speech is that I've heard from many people who were behind the Iron Curtain, what we used to call the Iron Curtain back then, and some of them in prisons, who were literally cheering when they heard President Reagan speak like that, because they said, good, there's somebody in the White House who's talking like that. So
it showed that there was no fear of the Soviet Union, and
yes,
that's what a lot of people. I mean, the Russians, the Soviets at that point, seemed to be peddling more fear than they were ideology. Mm-hmm. It wasn't so much that they were trying to create a workers' paradise as much as they were trying to force you to do what they wanted.
Well, I mean, it was kind of a high point for them. What many of us didn't know, I think they knew this. I think Reagan knew this, but what a lot of us didn't know is how quickly they were really headed for collapse.
Yep.
But a lot of us in the outside didn't realize how quickly it would be. But the evil empire did collapse in '89, or at least the Berlin Wall came down. And I think this speech and the other one, Gorbachev tore down this wall, will always be two of my favorite Reagan speeches. He gave many, of course, but these were two of my favorites. Exactly on this day back in '83, although there was also one in '82 in the House of Commons in London. But the evil empire, man, that got the liberals really excited, as I recall, George. I mean, they were like, oh my God, this guy's going to start a world war. Well, he never did. On the contrary, the Soviet Union collapsed. All right, well, let's move on to another speech more to the day, and that's President Trump's technically not a State of the Union because it's his first one, the first one of this term, the fifth one overall, I guess. And it was actually a statement before Congress. I think that's what they call it. But I thought, my own assessment of it was that it was a very strong speech, very well delivered. Whoever outlined everything, whoever wrote everything, whoever said, do this, was a genius. And what made it even more brilliant of a speech, George, is the pathetic, idiotic, and childish, and if I may say so, immature reaction of the Democrats. I mean, it's like you're sitting there and you're going, my gosh, this is crazy what we're hearing from the other side. So I thought it was a big night for President Trump, and all the polling data reflects that, George.
Yeah, I mean, it was fun to a certain degree to watch, but at the same time, it was also very disgusting and shocking that adult people who are elected representatives of some people behave in that manner, that they get elected even though they publicly behave in that manner. Civil rights has become more about revenge and anxiety and anger than it has about anything else. It also has created a situation where civility isn't really something that people strive for. Right. There is no reason why you can't listen to what the president had to say, and then afterwards have a counterpoint and explain your point. There's no reason why you can't do that. In fact, that's the way it was done, and that's the way it should be. Instead, you had this person, this congressman
from Texas, of all places,
Texas, screaming and having to be escorted out of the room.
I think he's
that
from
is
Houston,
just incredible. You had people flashing cards with messages. It is behavior that is completely childish, ridiculous, and it serves no purpose other than to make you look dumb.
Right.
However,
it didn't help the Democrats. I'll
it
say
didn't.
that.
However, there's that old saying, that people without shame don't care. That's exactly what these people, they have no shame and they didn't care.
Yeah, I mean, all of a sudden, two Democrat Congress people from Texas, Mr. Green, who I think is nearby Houston.
Yeah, he is. He is.
And there's a lady in our area, Crockett, who replaced Eddie Bernice Johnson.
Correct.
And I guess she's decided that she's going to be the outspoken one. And she's pretty outrageous in some of the things that she's saying. But if I am a Democrat in these districts that they represent, I'm saying to myself, I wish they would talk about the problems in our district, not just sit there and beat up Trump. But Trump derangement syndrome is a strong thing, George.
It's a real thing. It is a real thing. Yeah, it is a real thing.
When it hits people, it's like a virus that doesn't go away, George.
These two individuals, along with several others. I mean, you got Rose DeLauro from New York with her pink or blue hair, whatever, I can't remember which one it is. You've got her. You've got Schiff from California. You've got people who are seriously, in my opinion, disturbed, who are mentally not functioning with their complete faculties. Otherwise, they wouldn't behave the way they do. Right. They are either trying out for some theater or circus, or they have completely lost their sense of proprieties, their sense of civility. It's shameful. It is very shameful.
It was, and it was a totally incredibly silly performance. That's how I describe it. Most of the country, in pretty good numbers, supported the speech. By the way, speaking of crazy performance, our old friend Bart Simpson is listening to us again tonight. So, Bart, welcome. It's always good to see that you're in the crowd. I would have to say that what we saw the other night on Tuesday night, probably even the Simpsons would reject it because it was too nutty. So anyway, good to see you, Bart. Thanks for saying hello. But one of the things that I found so interesting about that reaction from the Democrats is I would love to be the one who was handing out these placards. Because, I mean, I could just imagine how crazy this must have been. But I also said the other day at another interview, I said that I think that the ladies in the U.S. House, the Democrat ladies in the U.S. House, must have gotten the wrong invitation. They probably got an invitation for a Halloween party. And the idea was to come to a Halloween party and dress up as a witch or something, because they were really crazy in what they were saying, what they were doing. But George, I think the low point of the night for me, for the Democrats, is when that young kid from Texas, I guess Texas was all over this speech, was it? When the kid from the little 13-year-old kid from Texas, who's a cancer survivor, who was made an honorary member of the Secret Service, you know the story. It was a pretty incredible story. They don't even get up for him. Yeah. They don't even applaud that. I mean, my gosh, there's nothing political about that story.
What it showed is that all Black lives don't really matter.
That's it.
All Black lives mattered, then they would have respected this child and saluted him, praised him. I mean, he's a cancer survivor, for crying out loud, but they didn't, because he was sitting with the opposition. It's typical Marxism. What's more important is the politics, not the reality. The politics is what's more important.
No, I know something about that. You're exactly right. And of course, there were other instances too when he mentioned that young woman who had been hurt playing volleyball, I guess. Mm-hmm. And of course, that was obviously a political hit at the Democrats, who the day before completely had voted against or in favor. I guess I'm not sure how to say it, but
no, they voted against the
the ban, right, on men
Yeah, the
playing in
ban
women's
on men
sports.
playing in women's sports.
Yeah, which is, to me, I mean, that's what, a 90-10 issue. I mean, if you're going to actually go to war to defend men playing in women's sports, you're asking for it, George. I mean, that's an issue that 10%, I mean, 90% of the country looks at that and goes, "This is crazy. A man playing against a woman? That's crazy." I mean,
who was it? Some Democrat strategist said that's a hell of a hill to die on. I couldn't agree more.
well, I thought it was very interesting because Mark Penn, who he's a pollster now. He's a pollster now, but he used to work for Clinton, and I believe he worked for Mrs. Clinton as well, for President Clinton, for President Obama, and for Mrs. Clinton. And he was saying, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but he was basically saying this party's crazy. I mean, they're digging themselves a bigger and bigger hole with what they're doing. But anyway, just a good night, I thought, for President Trump.
Very good night for President Trump. Very good night for the administration in general.
Yeah.
I think that it further solidifies in everybody's view how far the Democrats have gone to the left and down.
I think you're right. And I think the reason that the speech was successful was, I mean, if you look at the numbers, they say 70, 75%. I'm not, when I look at these instant polls are not necessarily about the issues. I think they are more about the presentation.
Correct.
And so when you have a man who came across as a leader, as a strong leader, a man with a plan, as they like to say, that the guy has a plan, whether you like him or not, that's another story. But the guy has a plan. I think people like people. I mean, I think the voters like a president with a plan rather than someone with a wishy-washy attitude. Well, let's talk a little bit about the Department of Education. I think you and I are old enough to remember when President Carter created that back in 78 or 79. Never really understood it. Why? Well, why do we need a federal Department of Education? Not exactly been very successful. The Department of Education
in the worst way. I mean, it hasn't been successful in the worst way.
No. I mean, that'd be like a secretary. I mean, that'd be like a Department of Defense that has lost every war since it was created. But in this particular case, the problem, George, is that he's going to have to get Congress. He cannot do it by himself. President Trump cannot, by executive order, eliminate the Department of Education. So he's going to have the Senate at least play a role in it, which may be tough getting 60 votes. But there is a way to do it, I believe, through reconciliation. If you simply, eliminate the budget. If you eliminate the budget of the Department of Education, then you have a building where nobody gets paid. Well, then that's the end of the Department of Education. But it has never really accomplished much in the area of education, except if you talk to teachers, they'll tell you that they're overwhelmed with regulations and surveys and memos that they have to read. None of it has anything to do with teaching Johnny and Mary how to read and write, George.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's obvious that the Department of Education has served administrators and unions more than it has served students.
That's a good point about the unions.
The unions and the unions and the administrators are the ones that are loudest at screaming about keeping it open. You don't hear that from students. You don't hear that from parents unless they are being mobilized by the unions and the administrators. But at this point, you've got to look at it with common sense. You've got to say, okay, what have they done for the educational levels of America? And I mean, we're worse off than we were in 1979 when it was created.
By a lot, not just by a little bit. I mean, we're really
we're
way
spending
down.
more money and we've got less to show for it.
That's right. And on top of that, George, you've got a couple of other things going on. I mean, American parents are voting with their wallets. And so at the moment, 11% of all the kids in the country are doing homeschooling.
Yes.
And that's national. Okay. My guess, and I don't have any evidence to support this, but my guess is that figure in Texas is closer to 15, maybe even more than 15.
That
Because
would be, you'd think that would be a something that would be a bellwether for the Department of Education for those that support it, but apparently it doesn't.
no,
It just asks for more money.
that's it. But when you look at the number of parents who are homeschooling, as I say, 11% national, it's higher than that in Texas. I really believe it because I can just feel it from talking to people. And then on top of that, you have the number of states. Texas is about to become the next one, where you have some kind of school choice, whether it's vouchers or whatever format it comes in. So even the state legislatures are saying, no, we want to give parents more input in this. And my sense is you shut down the Department of Education, you send that money to the states for their schooling issues, and the whatever, if there are charges of discrimination or whatever, we let the Department of Justice worry about that. That's what it's there for. But there's no reason to have a Department of Education at a time like this when, as you indicated, the scores are going down and down and down and down, and more parents are literally walking with
All we're
their
doing is
wallets.
spending money. All we're doing is spending more and more money.
We're spending huge amounts of money that I would rather have the states do it.
Exactly.
Have the states do it. Anyway, let me now just one more thing about the Department of Education. The only way, though, just to make my point, the only way that the President Trump can do that, short of a vote in the Senate, would be to basically end the funding through reconciliation, right? That's, I think, the only way they can shut it down, and not necessarily shut it down, but just dry up the money for it. I think that's the only way. All right. Well, then let's get on another quick topic here at the end. In this, we're doing a little speculation in this segment, but we're looking ahead to 2026. Two very important races here in Texas in 2026. One is going to be the governor, and the other one is going to be the U.S. Senate. We have Senator Cornyn in the U.S. Senate, and we have Governor Abbott. Now, I have not heard anything about these two men, whether or not they're going to run for re-election. My gut feeling is that they're both running for re-election. That's just my gut feeling. They both seem to be happy with what they're doing. Governor Abbott is having a lot of success, and I think he would love to would love to work with a Republican administration in the White House. And I think Senator Cornyn the same way. But again, have you heard anything about anybody who might be interested in running if these two decide not to run, or perhaps even challenge them in the primaries? More likely Cornyn would have a challenge in the primary. Any word about that, George?
The only person that I've heard recently who has actively said that they are going to run for governor is Hoffines, who has run for governor before and lost, but apparently he wants to run again. Mm-hmm. And he is very much a conservative darling. I thought last time that he would do a whole lot better than what he did, but he didn't. Right. I was very much.
And that was his best opportunity, I thought, because he was running. His whole issue was the border.
Yeah.
In 2022, and I thought he would do better, but Abbott was able to get out of the primaries without a runoff, and I thought there was going to be a runoff. I think we talked about it, George.
Yeah, and it surprised me. It really surprised me that that he didn't do as well as what everybody thought that he would do. So I don't know what he, if Abbott does not run, he may have a better shot at it. And also depending on who else enters the race. At this point, he's the only one that has declared an interest.
But you would think that if Abbott doesn't run, that the lieutenant governor is within a few minutes.
And he would have a very difficult time. I mean, I like Hoffines, but I think he'd have a very difficult time. Just honestly speaking, I think he'd have a difficult time with the attorney general, because
with Patrick, Yeah, I think if Patrick gets in, he's got the nomination wrapped up. I don't
Yeah,
think that.
because Patrick is a conservative as well. So
Right, and a very popular one. I mean, it's tough for Huffines to run against Patrick. I mean,
yeah,
in 22 he ran against Abbott, and if you remember,
so he's the only one. I mean, Hopkins is the
yeah.
only one that I've heard so far.
And the thing about Huffines is if you are familiar with his last name, he's he'll have lots of money. He doesn't have to worry about money. He'll have a lot of money to run. But I think Patrick would be the one. If Patrick doesn't run, are there any? Can you think of any state legislators,
No, at this point,
any
I can't. I
congressmen
mean,
or anything?
at this point, I if I name any names, they just be coming off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's right. No, nobody. You're right. No, nobody. So that's the reason I asked you this topic today, George, is because I'm leaning more and more to the idea that Abbott is going for it again. I really do.
Yeah,
I think Abbott, he's relatively young. He seems to be enjoying the job, and I think he would love to serve with a Trump presidency. Now, the other one, of course, is the U.S. Senate, and I think Cornyn would be tough to beat in a primary. I think he would have, and he's probably very electable in a general election, George. I think Cornyn, if you remember the last time when he defeated that lady who ran against him, he got almost 15-point lead. And that was in what, 2020 when he ran? And that was like right after the 2018 Beto phenomenon, when, a lot of people were saying that the Republicans were going to not do as well in Texas. But I think in the Texas of 2025, I think Cornyn would do quite well, George.
I hate to disagree, but I had
please
heard
do.
a lot of at the grassroots level.
No, I know.
A lot of discontentment with Cornyn.
So who would replace him?
Well, that's a good question.
Paxton was the name that I hear.
Paxton, possibly, maybe even the Patrick.
Patrick, and there's also, I think for the Senate, there'd be a lot more members of Congress who would be interested in that.
Well, that too. So, that would be, but at this point, my sense is that, and I have seen it, I have seen him a little bit more active, but Cornyn, he's got a problem at the grassroots level. There are many, many people who feel that he has been aloof, that he has been rather, distant, and that he's been there a long time. And that's another thing. So,
well, he came in, when did he come in? Right after, what was it, 90? I think Bush was governor when he came in, I think. But anyway, so that'll, something to think about.
Interesting to watch.
Yeah, to watch as another one, too, who may run for governor. I just thought of, you mentioned Bush, George B. Bush could run for governor as well the next time around. We'll see about that. Well, George, I can't think of anything else to talk about. I know that sounds crazy, but is there anything else that we forgot? Any big news that I overlooked?
No, I think if we wait 24 hours, we'll have a lot more to talk about.
Well, we'll wait a week, and I'm sure there'll be something to talk about the next time. But I will say this: the whole issue of Ukraine, if I could just bring that up really quickly, that is interesting right now. The whole question of tariffs. We'll talk more about that the next time. But, I like what President Trump is going to do with reciprocal tariffs. I like that. I think that makes a lot of sense, and that's easy to explain. But my one concern I do have about the tariffs is some economic impact that they could have in the price of a few things. And at a time when I think most Americans want to see a drop in prices. That's the only thing about tariffs that I would be concerned about. I don't think that the impact with Mexico would be that large because their economy is much smaller than ours, and with Canada as well. But it's still, I think people want to see prices drop, George. I think that's the one important point for President Trump to get that started.
I agree.
Yeah. So we'll see how that one goes. I have a funny feeling it's all going to be negotiated. I really do. Especially now that Canada has a new prime minister. Did you hear that today? That they have a new prime minister at least until they have an election. Trudeau left or resigned, and the Liberal Party now has a replacement for him. I guess they call it an acting prime minister until they have an election. And this guy who got in today is, strikes me as kind of a very moderate, almost very bureaucratic kind of guy. I don't know what it's going to be like when he starts negotiating with Trump, but he just looks more like a businessman than Trudeau ever did. And I think he and Trump could actually get along fairly well. That's just my impression, George. We'll see. We'll see how it all goes. But I want to thank you as always for your time, and look forward to our next time together. And we'll see how the weather changes over the next week, George.
You got it. I'll be here anytime. You got it.
All right. Thank you so much. Our good friend, George Rodriguez from South Texas. Always enjoy chatting with him on Sundays and getting a feel for things here in Texas. The Texas legislature, school choice is a big issue. Who's going to be running for governor in 26? Who's going to be running for the U.S. Senate? All these kinds of issues. And again, I just want a quick plug, if I may. I did have post an article today at the American Thinker about this Reagan speech back in 82. Actually, it was twice that he gave it, 82 and 83, about the evil empire. If you're old enough to remember stuff, I think you'll enjoy that. That reminiscing about one of Reagan's, I think, most consequential speeches, the evil empire. Thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.